Choices, choices, choices. Isn't that life? Every day we have a multitude of choices. And some of them are big and some of them are small. But we have all kinds of choices that we have to make every day. You know, maybe it is about a relationship and whether we're choosing between love or lust, or maybe it's about our lives and our emotional life, and we're choosing whether or not we're going to worry or whether or not we're going to pray, or maybe it has to do with our integrity and we're choosing whether or not to be honest or dishonest. We have choices every day. I think oftentimes what we may not do is think about the long road, the implication of our choices. What will actually happen as a result of this series of choices that I'm starting to make? You know, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 down the road. We don't often think about that. Sometimes we do. But how is it that we can choose wisely? How is it that we can become a people who will make wise decisions, whether they're on big issues or small issues? And the Bible has a lot to say about that, about the types of choices that we make. In the Old Testament, just before the people were to enter the promised land, God spoke to them and He talked to them about choices. You know, this is the promised land that they've been waiting for, and finally they're on the verge of entering in, and God's saying, I've got something I want to talk to you about, and it's the types of choices that you make. In Deuteronomy Chapter 30, He says, now listen, today I'm giving you a choice between life and death, between prosperity and disaster. For I command you this day to love the Lord your God, to keep His commands and decrees and regulations by walking in His ways. If you do this, you will live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you and the land you are about to enter and occupy. But if your heart turns away and you refuse to listen, and if you're drawn away to serve and worship other gods, then I warn you now that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live a long, good life in the land you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. Today, I've given you the choice between life and death, He says. The choice between the real life that you were created to have and death. Separation from that life. Between blessings and curses. Now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Oh, that you would choose life, so that you and your descendants might live. Oh, that you would choose life. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody that you care about, and you're trying to convince them to do a certain thing or to not do a certain thing? And you say, oh, if you know, in our minds we say, oh, if you would only get this. You know, oh, if you would only not do that. And you can hear almost that sense in God's voice when He's saying, oh, if you would only choose life. Your choices matter. My choices matter. The things that I decide to do, and oftentimes we think about, well, it's only a little thing. It's only a small thing. My best friend in Bible college, his name was Brian, but all of his friends called him Sparky for two reasons. One was his red hair, and the other was his personality. And he used to say to me, it used to bug him when college students would say about something they were going to do, a choice that they were making, and it was, you know, really a small choice, like a small issue, a little thing. And he would hear them say, you know, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. What's the problem? It's just a little thing. It's just a little choice. What's the big deal? And if you knew him then, you would know that every time he heard that, you could see his face would turn almost as red as his hair. And he would confront people regularly and say, it is a big deal. Those little choices, they are a big deal. Maybe they don't seem like a big deal to you right now, but there's a cost. There's an end to that choice and that series of choices that you're making. So God was reminding His people, He was saying, your choices matter. They matter a lot. And he was also saying, you actually get to choose. Sometimes in life, we wish we could choose certain things and we can't. But he's saying, your choices matter. And guess what? You actually get to choose. You get to choose between life and death. You get to choose between prosperity and disaster. You get to choose. That's a good thing, right? It's not like we're helpless and we don't have that opportunity. We get the opportunity to choose. So how is it? We ask, why would anybody choose death? Why would anybody choose disaster, like intentionally? Like knowing that this is a bad choice and I keep making choices like this, disaster is going to happen. Why would anyone do that? I don't know. Why would anyone choose and make a choice that would lead to disaster or death? Isn't it just chance? Isn't it just, you're kind of either in the right spot at the right time or you're not in the right spot at the right time? Isn't it just chance? Isn't that the way that it works? Some people are lucky. Some people are unlucky. Some people are in the right place at the right time. Others are not. Isn't that the way that it works? Sometimes we think like that. What do my choices have to do with it? Do my choices influence things for good, not only in that individual choice, but in the long run? Do my choices have influence for bad in the long run? Or is it just that little thing and it's no big deal? It's just that little isolated thing and it really is not going to hurt anything or anybody? Or is there a cost to pay when I begin to make a series of choices, even though most, if not every time, all times, they typically start small, right? Good and bad choices. How can I begin to make choices, good choices? What choices does God want me to make? How does He want me to decide? And we're going to look this week and next week at the types of choices that we make. And this week we're going to look at what typically we would call a bad choice or a bad example or a bad decision and the results of that decision. And next week we'll look at good decision, a good choice that people made, a person made, or people made, and the implications of that choice. But God has, each one of us, every day we're making choices that not only impact me, that not only impact just a small circle around me, it impacts every person I'm in community with, whether it's my own family, my church family, my workplace. And it doesn't only impact my present, but it also impacts my future. And God wants us to think about those choices, and that's what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to ask the worship team to come. Every day, new choices. Some are the same. Some are those recurring choices in your life. A couple of things I was trying to find a way to illustrate this. And a recent visit to the doctor convinced me that this is probably not a bad way to illustrate it. A couple of things my doctor said, and unfortunately my wife was there listening. So I can't deny that he said it. And so I was thinking about how do you illustrate the difference between good choices and bad choices. And so I thought, well, typically one of the places that kind of the daily thing for us has to do with the things that we eat, which is in fact just maybe what the doctor was talking to me about. And so I was thinking, well, what about snacks? I mean, for some of you, snacks themselves are an issue. So you have a craving and you're hungry and you kind of go, well, what should I really have? Well, I know what tastes really good and I know what is really good, and they're often not the same thing. In fact, Anna's mom used to say, you are what you eat. And then she'd pull out this low-fat, no-taste, no-calorie stuff, and I go, ugh. But when it comes to snack time, I mean, you could have, the old standard. You could go for chips and a chocolate bar, and popcorn is kind of one of those in-betweeners. Or if you like cold things, you like ice cream, you could choose sherbet. Or you could have Tiger Stripe ice cream, which is absolutely you could have this choice, right? Somebody tells me one is better than the other. I really don't know about that. I'm not sure that I agree with that. Or when it comes time to drink coffee, maybe the choice is whether I do or whether I don't. And I know people who've decided to stop drinking coffee. That's a good choice if that's the choice they want to make. Or they said, I really like my coffee, so now I have another choice. And the choice is whether I go with decaf or I go whole hog. That's the way that I think about it. I won't tell you which one I choose. I think you might already know. So you can do that. Or if you have it's time to have a drink, you can choose between Pepsi or Diet Pepsi, not Coke, or you could choose water, which they tell me that's a good thing to choose. Or you could have, fruits and veggies, which in fact are supposed to be, I hear, are supposed to be good for you. Yeah. Or if it's breakfast time, you could have, you could have corn bran. That sounds lethal. Or you could have honeycomb or Fruit Loops, look at the color. Doesn't that look great, it can't be that bad for you. Or you could have oatmeal. Whoa, yeah. In fact, my wife sent me to the store to buy Red River oatmeal, which I never buy oatmeal unless she makes me, and I never eat it. And so she said, "Can you get the Red River stuff?" So I didn't know what I was getting. I bought the Red River, and I brought it home. She said, "Well, that's not exactly what I was looking for." She said, "I think that's closer to what they call grits." And whatever that is, I'm sure it's probably a lot like oatmeal, and I don't really want to try it. But, when you think about the kinds of choices that we make, we do really have the choice between something that is good and something that is maybe not so good. Something that is good and something that is definitely bad. You can choose when it comes time to, maybe it's the middle of the day, you have an hour or two to kill, and you say, you have a choice either between, the lazy boy. Not any of you have one of those in your house. I have two, actually. You can choose either the lazy boy or you can choose exercise, to go for a hike, to go for a walk. I don't know if you look like that when you go for your hike. You have a choice, right? You can choose either a Big Mac meal. Don't look like that. Some of you have had Big Mac meals, and maybe not that long ago. You can either choose that, or you can choose something that is maybe a little healthier. I was reading the newspaper, and the other thing that kind of encouraged me to use this as an illustration was reading the paper, and there's a nutritionist in there, and she was saying that, she said, I try to get people to think about it, when they think about what they're eating, not only what they're eating, not only the carbs and the protein and all that stuff, whatever that means. Well, not only that, but the types that you eat, the quality of it, right? And she said, I try to get people to think about it in terms of, a peace symbol. So that 2/3 of that plate has carbs, like vegetables and fruit and, all those things that are good for you. And the other third or less is protein. And she said, I have a struggle sometimes, she said, with athletes who come in and say to me, well, a Big Mac meal, that's the 2/3. You got your 2 carbs, you got your fries and your bun, right? And then you get your protein, you got your meat, right? So they try to convince her that this is actually a good meal. She says, well, it's not just about the quantity. In other words, 2/3 of this and 1/3 of that. She says it's also the quality. But the implications of our choices, there are implications to our choices. And they have short-term implications and they have long-term implications. Good ones and bad ones. The Israelites are a good example of a lot of things, actually. And typically, we think about them as a good example of bad things, of bad choices. No, they didn't always make bad choices, but there are quite a few examples in the Old Testament, particularly, of the Israelites and the choices that they had, and they made the wrong one. Crazy, right? But they did. And in Numbers chapter 13, the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. Send one from each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." And so Moses sent them out to explore this land that God had promised them. He says, "You're going to have this promised land." They've been waiting for this promised land. They're getting very close to this promised land. Now he says, I want you to go out and just see what it is that you're going to have. I want you to just know what it is. Know what's in this land. So at the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite assembly at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey." Means like everywhere you look, there's good stuff. This is a rich land. All the best. If you were going to pick a land that you wanted to settle in, if you had all your choice, this was choice land. This was the best. So they said it's flowing with milk and honey. And here's its fruit. But the people are powerful. And cities are fortified and they're large. And then Caleb silenced the people before Moses said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we certainly can do it." So now you have two contrasting options. One group is saying, you know what? Both groups are saying, yes, it's good. One group is saying, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it because there are huge people there and they have fortified cities. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. And Joshua and Caleb said, I think we should go. Let's go. But the men who had gone up with them said, we can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw are of great size. That's a scary picture. There's no way we're going to be able to take these guys. They're huge. And so they're spreading this bad report among the people. The people knew why they went, but when they heard the bad report, they forgot why they went, why they were sent. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and when we look the same to them. So when we looked up to them, we felt like grasshoppers. When they looked down at us, we look like grasshoppers to them. In other words, they can just squash us like a bug. We're in trouble if we try to go into that land. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if we had only died in Egypt, why did you bring us here? It wasn't so bad back there. It wasn't that bad. Why did you? At least we had a house. At least we knew what to expect. Why did you drag us out of there to face this? If we'd only died in Egypt or in this wilderness even, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? What a cruel God. Why would he do that? Does he not care? Why would he drag us all the way here, all this time, only to see us die in the wilderness? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? They said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Enough. Moses, enough Aaron. I don't want to listen. Let's not listen anymore. Let's pick our own leader who will tell us what we want to do, and then we'll go do it. And that was nothing. It had nothing to do with what God sent the people, the spies in to scout out the land. It had nothing to do with their mission. God wasn't saying, figure out if you can take it. He was saying, guess what? I'm going to give you a little snapshot, a little picture of what it is, and you just go and look and see what needs to be done, and you will do it. But they came back and said, no, it can't be done. There's no way. We can't do this. That's not what God intended for his people. So Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the people. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us." He will do it. If God wants to do it, we just need to go. If he says go, we just need to go. If he tells us where to go, we just need to go there. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us, so do not be afraid of them. He's with us. What do you have to fear? There's nothing for you to really be afraid of if God is with us and saying, "I want you to go," and so we're going because he says go. He says there really is nothing to fear. Well, there would be things to fear if God wasn't with you. But he's saying God is with you. He promises to go with you. He's telling you to go. But everybody talked about stoning them. Said, don't listen to them. They were so afraid of this report. You know how gossip works, eh? One person says one thing and then the person repeats it, and it's not quite exactly the way it was when they heard it. And usually it's a little bit worse. And then another person repeats it, and it's a little bit worse. And by the time it makes its rounds, it's nothing like the original statement or whatever it was. And it's most times much worse. Well, that's what happened. Don't do it. We can't do it. You won't believe this. And then someone would say that and say, yeah. Someone would say, yeah, they're 10 feet tall. Another person would say, yeah, I heard they're like 12 feet tall. And then that person repeats it. They go, yeah, they must be like 15 feet tall. We'll never do it. That's the way it works, right? Well, maybe just then. It doesn't work that way now. We don't do that kind of thing. Do we? Joshua and Caleb, they got it. I mean, they understood. They understood what God sent them to do. And they understood what he still wanted them to do. And they didn't change. They heard, they trusted, they obeyed. But they were a small voice. The Israelites, they just still didn't get it. They just didn't get it. They thought their own view of what it was and what it was going to be overruled what God was saying. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I've heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites, so tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall. Every one of you 20 years old or more who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me, you're all going to die. You're not going to go into the promised land, the land that I promised. You're not going to get it. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with an uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun." They're the only two. Out of the whole, do you get this picture? Of the people who were around them, the only ones who are going to go in are those two. I mean, there's lots of others, but they're younger now. Oh, an entire generation. Like, that's amazing. Why? Because they didn't trust and they didn't obey. It wasn't what God intended. So the men that Moses had sent to explore the land, who returned and made the whole community grumble against him by spreading a bad report about it, were struck down. And they died of a plague before the Lord. Of the men who went to explore the land, only Joshua and Caleb survived. Only the ones who listened to what God said, trusted what he said, took him at his word, and then responded, obeyed accordingly. They were the only two. And they were the only two that got the blessing. The others died. It was disaster. That's what happened to them. Even at the end of that story, the Israelites finally got it. And they said, oh, well, let's go do this. Maybe this will please God. Maybe this will make God happy with us. And Joshua and Caleb said, no, don't do that. It's too late. You can't make up for what you did. There's a cost involved. And God said you're going to pay the cost, and you will pay the cost. It's there. You know, there's an incredible cost for disobedience. For all of us. They lost God's blessing. You stop and think about it. You know, I don't know how many of you have traveled, but you know, you think about the different places that you go, and we've been really blessed to have. I didn't travel much the first 30 years of my life, but I've traveled a fair amount in the last, more than 20 or so. And I've seen. I've been really blessed, and there's a lot of some places you go, oh, that place. That place is amazing. There's just so much wealth. It's a rich place. It's we went to California, and of all the places that I went, it's probably the wealthiest place. Like, not only in money, but just land. Everything. It's beautiful. It's always sunny. You have to kind of put the earthquake part over here somewhere, and a few other things. But it's just beautiful. It's so rich. I think of a land like that and say, if they were describing a land of milk and honey, it'd be kind of like, in my mind anyway, it'd be kind of like California. Certain parts of it anyway. But they gave up that because they did not want to do what God was saying to do. They gave it up. He didn't take it away from them because he's vindictive or he doesn't care. He doesn't want them to have good things. They gave it up. They gave it away. They lost God's blessing and they gained a curse. They lost what was good, what God was saying you can have, and they gained disaster. An entire generation. Contrast that with Joshua and Caleb. And they got it. They figured it out. It doesn't matter what I see with my own eyes. It's what I see with God's eyes. And when God says yes, it's yes. When God says go, it means go. When God says don't go, it means don't go. And if he says go, then whatever I need in order to make happen what he's saying I need to do, he'll make sure I have exactly what I need, what we need to make that happen. He promises to supply our need. Imagine all the way from Egypt. All those miracles. Every time I think of the miracle of parting the Red Sea, you've seen it. You've probably seen the way Hollywood has tried to portray it, and how do you even portray that? It's just so astounding that God did what he did. Even just to imagine it. They saw that. And still, they knew God's presence was going with them all across the desert. They knew that he was with them. There was evidence. And it was like it never happened. It wasn't enough. Slow learners. Not like us, of course. We're not slow learners. Are we any different? Really? Do we actually do it that much differently? How do our choices affect our lives? God is saying, look, I'm giving you a choice, and you get to pick. You get to pick whether it's good and it's blessing and it's life, or you get to pick. If you pick this way, you are picking death and disaster and destruction, or the curse, if you will. You're picking. God's not arbitrarily picking it for you. We pick it for ourselves. It's crazy when you think about it, but it's true. In Deuteronomy Chapter 11, he said, I brought you today to the crossroads of cursing and the blessing and the curse. I brought you to a crossroads. Oftentimes in our lives, we come to that crossroads. In fact, I think many times in a day or a week or a month, we come to that crossroads all the time. What am I going to choose? What am I going to pick? What decision am I going to make? What does God say? Oh yeah, but do I really want to do that? Can I really trust him? If he says do this, even though I don't see what's going to happen after I take that first step, can I trust him? Will I do what he's saying to do, or will I choose my own way? We come to that crossroads probably every day, more than once every day. All kinds of choices in our lives. He says, I brought you today to the crossroads of blessing and curse. The blessing. If you listen obediently to the commands of God, your God, which I command you today, that's how you receive the blessing. If you listen and you obey. The curse. If you don't pay attention to the commands of God, your God, but leave the road that I command you today, following other gods of which you know nothing. You pick. And one choice does lead to another choice. And they almost always start small. And they always start inside of us. You know, we kind of give ourselves away to bad choices in our mind and in our heart, and then it just happens because it's the way that it works. But it's the same with good. If I go, he's saying it, I'm going to take him at his word and trust him, and we begin to embrace that, whatever it is that he says to do or not to do, we embrace that, and then we act on it, and we discover it's true. We have the choice. I remember when I was younger, a long time ago, when I was younger, I was in and out of the church when I was younger, and I had, kind of a double-minded guy, like I liked some things about church, but I really liked a lot of things about, the other side of life. And so I was kind of this double-minded person, and it came to the point when I was in church and I had this choice. It felt like I was kind of, I was in the church family and they were kind of leading me in a certain way, and that would mean that God would be directing my choices. But I just really I wasn't sure that I wanted that. And what I ended up choosing, because I wasn't sure that I could trust God to bless my life with the best if I chose his way. I thought I knew the best way. I thought I knew what it meant to have fun. I did, to a certain degree. I love sports. I love playing. I love doing those. So you know what? That's what I did. And I thought, if I do what God wants me to do, maybe I'm going to have to trade the things that I think are fun, the things that I like to do, among other things. Not all of them were good. Many of them were sinful. So they were just wrong choices. I wasn't sure that I wanted to trade that for this. Now, I wasn't sure that God's idea of what it would mean for me to have a future, be successful, if you will, to have a life that means something, that counts for something. I wasn't sure that I could trust his version, because I had a kind of an image in my mind of what his version would lead to, and it just seemed like, he's going to send me someplace I don't want to go, and I'm going to end up doing something I don't want to do with people I don't even like, So I said, I don't want to do that. I want to do what I want with my life. So my future is in my hands, and I took it in my hands. Doing what I wanted to do, going where I wanted to go, pretty much when I wanted to do it. That was the life that I chose. The problem was, what I didn't understand then was, when I rejected God, I was actually refusing his blessing. I was saying, I don't want you, and I don't want what you want for me. Unfortunately, what I discovered over the next number of years was there's no peace inside me and inside us when we live that way. There was no joy in my life. What I thought would lead to freedom was not freedom at all. No hope, no future. In fact, to be honest, it was a life of chaos. And it ended in what I would term disaster. It happens when we choose our own way. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But those who miss me injure themselves. All who hate me love death, it says in Proverbs. All who miss me injure themselves. You know what? I came out of that very injured, very wounded, very hurt. And so did some others. Why? Because I wanted what I wanted. And I know what blessing is, right? I thought I did, but I didn't. And what I was saying was my choice was actually the worst choice, was actually a bad choice. I was choosing the curse and disaster. I was turning my back on the blessings that God had for me. It happens. Think about it. I see this, I've noticed this over the last 15 or so years as I reflect back on my life and as I basically try to do what God wants me to do with my life. I've discovered that there's some areas in our life, it touches every area of our life, where this whole idea of the kinds of choices that we make, and we're choosing whether or not we're going to end up in disaster or whether or not we're going to end up blessed. We choose relationships. I'm and again, any of these stories are not anybody here, so you can just forget if you think I'm talking about you, because I'm not. But I know of somebody who when they said, I'm going to make this relationship choice, knowing it was the wrong choice, knowing that it was overt, they were a believer, they're saying, I'm turning my back, I'm not going to do what God wants me to do. I know what He says, but I know what I want. I'm picking what I want and not what He says. And I said, don't you know where that leads? But they weren't thinking about that. They were just thinking about like today, next week, tomorrow, next month, next year. They weren't really thinking about 3 and 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years down there. They weren't thinking about that. I see it happen a lot. Sometimes we don't trust God with our emotional choices. We worry instead of pray. We give in to anxieties and fears instead of saying, God, you know what? I don't understand it all, but I'm going to trust you and be content that you care about me and you are taking care of the needs of my life. And I really, truly have nothing to worry about. But we don't always choose that. I have a friend, well, I haven't talked to him in a while, but I have a friend who, there was a point in his life, there was a period of time in his life where he was clearly choosing what God wanted to do in his life. And he struggled. Depression was an issue for him. He struggled with depression. And he struggled with certain things in his life. And for a while he was he was pushing through and he was choosing what God wanted in his life, and God was blessing him and blessing him. And then I had contact with him, probably 4 or 5 years after we left St. John, and I discovered that he had gone back, and he had stopped choosing what God wanted for his life, and he started isolating himself, started kind of putting a shelter on himself. Then he stopped going to church, then he stopped being a part of the men's group, and he stopped being involved in relationships the family of God that would help encourage and support him, and he struggled. And as far as I know, maybe things have changed, but last I heard, he was still struggling because he was choosing to kind of turn his back on the blessing, doing it God's way. Even financial decisions. I've done it. I said, but if I do this with my resources and give to what God wants to do, how can He bless that? I had one guy in my last year say one time, I actually had him preach on this topic. He said, if you're hanging on this tight to what God has given, entrusted into your care, then you can't possibly have your hands open for the blessings He wants to pour out in your life as you release what He has entrusted into your care back into His care. Let Him direct it. But others, we don't understand it. And so we hang on to what we have, and we try and make this work and make that work, and all the time or sometimes anyway, we don't trust God with it. Career choices. I'm always tempted to ask this question. I will ask this question. How many of you here this morning, if you were in a career, you picked it, and one of the primary reasons you chose that type of career was you thought, I can make good money at that? Anybody do that? 1, 2, yeah, there we go. Some honest people. That's good. I'm not saying the rest of you aren't honest, you understand. How many have you thought about, you don't have to raise your hands for this, how many of you thought, well, I could really go places in this. If I choose this type of career, I'll be able to move up and have status. And, we sometimes pick our careers based on that. Or it's our best guess. I don't know. I'll try this. Not that any of you have ever done that, but I have to admit that I probably did for a period of time in my life. How about our spiritual decisions? What do we base them on? How are we really doing with our choices? How are you doing with the choices that you're making? Are they good choices? Is that kind of the mark? As you come to decisions in your life, and whether they're this small or they're this big or anything in between, you go, what does God really want me to do? Are there some things involved? If I make this choice, will I actually be doing some things, have to do some things, maybe sacrifice my honesty, my integrity, whatever it is? Are there some things or my morals, what God says do and don't do? If I make this choice, will I actually be disobeying God in some way? Well, if I am, in any way, well, that helps me decide, doesn't it? It can. Does it? Or are you struggling with making some bad choices? Or bad choices that you made in the past? Who is directing your choices, our choices? Is it me? Is it what I know? Is it what I perceive? Is it what I understand? Is it what I've learned? Or is it God himself? Who's directing my choices? The good news, even in a bad choice, even with a bad example, and the Israelites gave us a very, very poor example. Almost the entire community died as a result of this choice that they were all a part of. Even in spite of that, God's saying it's not too late. It's not too late to start turning your choices around so that you are actually trying to find out what I want you to do, what I say you should do. You're turning away from what I say you shouldn't do, and you are choosing the blessing. You're choosing the good in your life. It's never too late. Until you take your last breath, of course. Then it's too late. Deuteronomy 11 says, look, today I'm giving you the choice between a blessing and a curse. You will be blessed if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. But you will be cursed if you reject the commands of the Lord your God. Turn away from him and worship gods you have not known before. So wherever you are this morning, this is a message for all of us. And whether you have a relationship with God and you are a part of his family, or you still have questions that are unanswered and you haven't taken that step. Wherever you are, it still applies to you. Will I choose blessing, God's blessing? Will I take him at his word? Can I trust him? My Bible tells me that I can and that you can. My experience tells me that it's absolutely true. You can trust him. When he says, if you do this, you will be blessed. If you don't do this, you will be blessed. However, if you make a choice other than those, you'll be inviting disaster. Jesus is offering freedom. So there's hope for your future. God made everything possible for you to deal with your past. All of it. Your guilt, your shame, your failures, your rejection of him, your selfishness, your pride. He made it possible for you to give all, that he will take care of all of that if you will only trust that he made it possible for you to do that. And it's only by faith you just give that to him. You say, I can't do anything with it. Here's the mess. And he says, that's the mess I died for. And for us as believers, we still make our messes along the way. And God wants us to give him those. And choose blessing. Because whatever the choice, there's an implication, there's a cost, there's a road that we go down, and we start to go down that road when the choices are this small. We can get off those roads, but we need God's help to do it. I invite the worship team to come. As they come, if there's something you want to communicate with us this morning, we appreciate your feedback, and if you have an action step that you're saying as a result of anything that happened here this morning, that you are going to, you're responding and you're going to do something with what you've heard from God, we want to encourage you just to pass that on to us, and we'll, if you want, we'll send you a reminder, just ask you how that's going in the middle of the week. And if there's a prayer request, please pass it on. And you can either leave it on your seat when you're done, we'll pick it up, or there'll be baskets at the end of the aisles and you can turn them in.